Literature lovers, and welcome to 21 Conversations, the 2021 Greensboro Bound Literary Festival. I'm Brian Lampkin, one of the organizers of Greensboro Bound and a co-owner of Scuppernong Books. Greensboro Bound is so excited to present to you these 21 conversations, our effort to create something unique and special for our community within the confines of our continued virtual environment. 21 Conversations pays homage to North Carolina's rich literary history while broadening our tent to welcome in voices from outside of our own microcosm of experience. This featured presentation is but a taste of the 52 authors that we have gathered together in a series of delightful, sometimes unexpected, but always edifying conversations. Since our inception, Greensboro Bound has been committed to providing programs just like the one you're about to watch, 100% free to our community. In order to do that, we need the financial support, both big and small, of readers just like you. Please support Greensboro Bound by giving now. The text to give phone number as well as our website are on your screen. A sustaining gift of just $15 a month, or the cost of a single children's book, will help us remain financially solvent throughout the year. I also want to take a moment to thank our sustaining supporters, without whom Greensboro Bound would just not be possible. Our utmost gratitude to the Edward M. Armfield Senior Foundation, the Ruth Lands Memorial Fund, and Arts Greensboro for their continued belief in our vision to bring together readers and writers of all genres, ages, ethnicities, identities, and voices to foster an understanding of writing as a process that allows free expression, deepens critical thought, and helps sustain a culture of inquiry and delight that is open to all. Thank you again for joining us for the 2021 Greensboro Bound Literary Festival. Please enjoy the conversation.
Hi, my name is Amy Reed, and I edited the anthology Our Stories, Our Voices. 21 YA authors get real about injustice, empowerment, and growing up female in America. It came out in 2017, and so we're at the kind of 4-year anniversary of the release of the book, and we're just kind of reflecting on how things have changed for us, how things have changed for the world, how things have changed for people who identify as women. And I'm really excited to be joined by 3 of the authors in the anthology, Amber Smith and Eileen Wong Gregorio and TRACY DEONN. And I'm gonna give everybody a chance to kind of briefly introduce themselves. I will start and just say that I am the author of 10, I think, YA novels at this point. My latest release is called Tell Me My Name, and it's a gender-swapped retelling of the Great Gatsby, told kind of as a psychological thriller. And that came out almost exactly a month ago. And I also wrote The Nowhere Girls, which was a novel about a group of high schoolers who get together to kind of fight the rape culture at their school and get justice for one of their classmates who was assaulted. And then also a lot of other things. So now let's have Amber introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amber Smith, and I am the author of 3 young adult novels and an upcoming middle grade novel. So my YA titles are The Way I Used to Be, which was my debut, and it deals with rape culture and sexual assault and really healing in the aftermath of trauma. And The Last to Let Go deals with domestic violence and sort of how the cycle of abuse plays out through generations. But not only that, it's what it takes to end that cycle as well. And then my most recent YA novel is something like Gravity, and it is a story about falling in love for the first time, and it's told from the alternating points of view of a boy who's recently come out as trans and a girl who is grieving the loss of her older sister. And then my upcoming middle grade book is quite a bit different than my previous books. It is the story of a girl, an 11-year-old girl who is in the middle of a really tough year in her life and finds the magical friendship of a dog. So, and a little bit about my personal life. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina with my wife and our ever-growing family of misfits, rescue dogs, and cats.
Thank you, Amber. How about Eileen? Do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. My name is Eileen Wong, or IW Gregorio. My bio says that I'm a practicing surgeon by day and master avenging YA author by night. And so my medical career definitely informed my very first book, my debut novel, None of the Above, which was pitched as Middlesex Meets Mean Girls, and is a story of a 17-year-old who finds out just after she was nominated homecoming queen that she was born intersex, neither male nor female, but something in between, and what happens when her best friend leaks her secret. And this is My Brain in Love, actually that way, isn't it? Is my second novel, which took a long time to write, but is finally out and actually just came out in paperback. And I like to pitch it as my happy story about mental illness. It's been described as a foodie rom-com, but it's also sort of the book of my heart in that it really was something that came out of my own history growing up in sort of upstate New York with anxiety and depression in a family of immigrants that didn't necessarily know how to navigate those issues. And so I like to think of it as my contribution to the literature on mental illness that isn't necessarily focused on the act of death by suicide, but that talks about the spectrum and everything leading up to it and the ways that people could help. And I'll pass it on to Tracy, who I am so happy to finally meet in person.
I know. I was thinking the same thing. Just like happy to meet you, because I don't think we've met even throughout the publication of Our Stories, Our Voices. So I'm TRACY DEONN. Our Stories, Our Voices was my first official publishing title, sort of debut in a way, not my debut novel, but definitely my first experience in the industry. So I'm super grateful to be here and super grateful for Amy. My essay was one of two that was selected by Amy and Lisa Abrams, the editor of the anthology, and it definitely changed my life being published in this book. Easily, I can say that. I think it was maybe a month or so or two after I first was told that this essay was going to be appearing that I got in touch with Lisa Abrams via Amy and found out that Lisa was interested in my work. Lisa later bought my debut novel, Legendborn, which came out in September of 2020. It is a contemporary fantasy about a 16-year-old girl, a Black girl in the South, who is grieving her mother and discovers that a group of students at UNC Chapel Hill are descended from the Knights of the Round Table, and they may know something about her mother's death. And so the story is about grief, and it's about pursuing answers, whether or not you know there are any, but that feeling when you lose someone close, that there has to be a story, an answer, a reason for their loss. And it's about legacy and power and how that is woven throughout our history, and particularly in Southern spaces and Southern campuses. So it pushes really hard on both the contemporary and the fantasy subgenres. And just yesterday, it was announced to be a finalist for the Lodestar Award at the Hugos, which is pretty amazing. So it's been a really cool year for me. I'm working on book 2 in the Legendborn series. Last year, another anthology piece came out of mine where I was a contributor to the From a Certain Point of View, Empire Strikes Back 40th anniversary Star Wars anthology, which was a ton of fun. I got to write from the perspective of the Cave of Evil on Dagobah, which was great. I didn't think they were going to let me write from the perspective of a cave. They said, pick a character. And I said, can a cave be a character? And they said, sure. So that was a lot of fun as a lifelong geek. I'm a big fangirl. My essay in Our Stories, Our Voices deals a great deal with that, actually, and what that means being geeky and teen Black girl who was trying to find her space in a world that wasn't always ready to celebrate all those aspects and those types of varieties of Blackness, as I like to talk about. So, and also I like a lot of ginger items. I love that that's the thing that sticks out in my bio, that I look for ginger flavored things everywhere I go.
Thank you, Tracy. I think you actually started a great segue into what we were going to talk about next, which was just kind of talking about our essays in the anthology and kind of, just talking about what did we write about, and you sort of started that. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more.
Sure. My piece is called Black Girl Becoming, and it's autobiographical about my experience being a teenage Black girl in predominantly white spaces and institutions in the South, where I grew up in North Carolina, which is, I grew up in the suburbs. Rural North Carolina is not too far from anywhere that I grew up, so there's that aspect as well. And for me, the story was about the intersections of race and gender, and how in my sort of developmental years, I was constantly sort of coming up against what felt like boundaries imposed on me by other people. And often what I was experiencing was intersectionality, but that word wasn't even in the lexicon at that point, and I certainly didn't have it available to me. But I was feeling a sort of specific type of pressure, being both a young Black girl and both being a Black teen and also a young Black girl. And then on top of that, there were things that I loved and enjoyed in life that were not really recognized as quote unquote Black in my group circles of peers, and not even just my peers, but adults in my life, family members, people at my church. Just there's a lot of, I think, in our country, which has a long history of determining the value and meaning of Blackness, there's a lot of external pressure about how that is performed in life, and what aspects of Blackness are acceptable in certain spaces.
Thank you. Eileen, do you want to talk a little bit about your essay?
Sure. So my essay is entitled Dreams Deferred and Other Explosions. And unlike Tracy, I feel like I couldn't talk about who I was as a woman without also talking about what it meant to be an Asian American woman, and with all the expectations and stereotypes, whether it be of the model minority or the submissive female, or the dragon lady that come with that, right? And the first line of the essay is that I don't remember exactly when I started hating my name. And I'm sure it's very interesting to all people who know me as IW Gregorio to know that I actually didn't take my husband's name when I got married. And it took me a really long time, and we can talk about this later, about why I decided to go with my husband's name instead of my own name. But like the first deep integral thing is that I've always hated my last name, because I hated the way it sounded. I hated the way that people made assumptions about who I was, about, you know, what I enjoyed, about the fact that I probably played the violin, which I hate that it was true, things like that. And I also talked about what those expectations and the burden of my family's, you know, being an immigrant family, placed on me as someone who was able to have a voice. Because for a long time, I really didn't feel like I could be a writer, even though I loved books. Books were my best friends. They were the things that taught me my morals, that, you know, introduced me to so many aspects of humanity, whether it be, you know, people being gay, whether it be people being of a different race, whether it being people of a different ability. And I talk a little bit about how when I was growing up, you know, I never saw myself in books, and it never really even occurred to me for a long time that um, Asian people could be authors, and which is one of the reasons why I did end up in medicine. And so I talk a bit about how my identity affected the way that I pursued my dreams, how I really did feel like I had to play by the rules for a long time. But then also I talked about how I started to rebel, and they were little things like playing hockey in college, for instance. I remember that being a very seminal thing to realize that it was an incredible source of power for me to be able to tell people, yes, I play hockey, and then for them to look at me through a different lens, because I think of hockey as, a really violent masculine sport. And I suppose I kept on doing that. When I became a doctor, I became a urologist. You can insert your joke here. People don't necessarily think of young Asian females being urologists, but I'm a darn good urologist. And just my being that and living in that space is an act of rebellion. And I think I end up just with wanting to talk about how all these experiences inform like who I am as a mother and what I want my kids to do.
Thank you. How about you, Amber?
So my contribution to the anthology was titled What I've Learned About Silence. And it's interesting because as I was writing this essay, it really evolved from kind of being a response to the election to being more about, my own, really looking into my own identity and my own past. And so my essay is really examining the different areas in my life when I was growing up and even into my adulthood where I felt that I was silenced either by external factors or silenced by myself. And so I write about growing up, being in the closet as a lesbian, and I write about also sort of being in the closet in a weird way about having learning disabilities. And this essay was really important to me because it was the first time, it was only the year prior to this book coming out that my debut novel had come out. I still really wasn't sure how to navigate kind of the public arena. And so this essay was the first time I had publicly stated that not only am I queer, not only do I have these like learning differences that really affected my growing up, but also we were in the midst of kind of the viral explosion of the Me Too movement. I had written a book about sexual assault, but I had been I don't know if afraid is the right word, but I had not been comfortable, I should say, coming out as a survivor. And so that's another thing that I talked about in my essay. And so when I look back on it, my essay feels very kind of all over the place, but the because I talked about so many different things, but really the unifying element is about silence and really wanting to break that silence not only for myself but for other women, future generations. And ultimately I think one of the last things I said in the essay is that people or society or systems will silence you because, or try to silence you because there's so much power in your story and your voice. And so my essay was as much and saying this for other people as saying it for myself.
Something you said really resonated with me, where you were apologizing for your essay being all over the place, which I thought it was incredibly well crafted, as were Eileen's and Tracy's, but just that kind of, that sentiment of like being all over the place. Like, I don't know how we talk about identity at all without being all over the place, because it comes from so many places and there's no linear way to explain it. And And I was just thinking about that in terms of of my essay in the book, which was called Finding My Feminism. And I was like sitting here trying to think of like how I was gonna do the little elevator pitch explanation of what it was about. But it's just there's so much. It's so hard to just distill it into like a little soundbite, because yeah, like it's just we become ourselves from so many different sources and so many intersections of those sources. And so yeah, just thinking about like how do I describe my essay? It's about finding my feminism. It's about my evolution as somebody who identifies as a feminist, and starting from a place of really feeling a lot of shame, shame in all sorts of places, right? Shame for like um, having this definition of what a strong woman was supposed to look like, and believing in that so deeply, and just also believing deeply in the fact that I was not that person, and feeling like I had to hide that. And then also just a lot of complicated feelings around what it means to be a survivor, and what it means to deserve compassion, and and kind of always grappling with this idea that like it wasn't bad enough to deserve the compassion that real survivors deserve. And so I think my essay is just all about like how all of those things kind of swirl together, like shame and expectations we have about ourselves, and being a victim versus being a survivor, and what does that evolution look like, um and ultimately finding my way to a place where I have to kind of let go of all of those kind of external ideas of what I think I'm supposed to be, and what and all the ways I feel like I'm failing at what that is, and just realize that like empowerment and feminism and all of those things is a matter of making choices, and it's a matter of making choices that feel true to me. And that's been my process of kind of becoming an empowered woman, is realizing that like I have a voice, and that I have the power to choose things for myself. Um, because for the longest time, as a young woman, as a teenager, I had no idea how to say what I wanted, what I didn't want. I had no idea how to even ask myself those questions. And so my essay is really about just that process of just knowing myself and being able to articulate that self to the world, which I think is what all the authors did in this book in so many different ways, um, and so with so much vulnerability and so much courage. And I just want to thank you all again for being a part of it, and just honoring me with your voice and your story, and all of the readers being able to read it too. So I think let's move on to like another topic. I'm curious, this book, we made this book 4 years ago, and a lot has happened since then. I think I don't know how it's possible to be the same person we were 4 years ago, right? Like there's been so much to adapt to and respond to and react to. And I hope that, we've grown as a result of that. And so I'm just curious, like where are you now? How have your views and your just your experiences of being a female in America, how have those changed over the course of the last 4 years?
I could start. I think, I think there's been for me sort of like a crystallization or like a stronger, sharper sense of my own power, like as a woman, as a Black woman, as a an author who's a woman who's an author. Like I feel like I've gotten a lot more clear about what that can mean. I think I've also been fortunate enough, or maybe just felt empowered enough to create my own spaces and friendship circles around around my identities and even my intersecting identities. I think that was something I look back, and of course this is a little bit skewed perhaps because of COVID and the way that relationships have changed. But I don't know about you all, but I'm definitely in like 2 or 3 Slacks or group channels, and I'm finding that I really gravitated to people, remotely, that were much more aligned with my sort of personal needs as a, as a creator, as a woman. And I don't know if that I would have really gotten very focused about what that meant and like sought out the engagement with that community, with the communities that were supporting to me without COVID. But I do think that has something to do with owning for myself, like, what do I need to sort of feed me? And there are spaces where I need to be able to go and just be who I am that day, that moment, and not have to sort of censor or, filter. And I think that when I think about myself 4 years ago or 3 years ago, even, like, that I was allowing for a lot more of that in my life than I do now. Like right now, I'm like, if I have to do that extra labor to talk to friends, I'm not doing it. I have no tolerance. I don't have the time, the day, the energy, like I just don't have it. So I feel like I'm fortunate to be able to have other community members in my life. It's not always easy to find that. So I don't assume that that's something that I could have just found without, the universe putting me in a good spot. But also I know that I am saying no to other spaces in order to be in those communities.
I resonate with that so much. Just that idea of being really selective of who you spend your time and energy on. And I think that, I mean, like, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and that is just something that I really, really want to like teach her, because I never knew that. And I wasted so much energy and time trying to like maintain relationships with people who were just like sucked the life out of me. And I think definitely in the last few years, especially in this last year, like, I am just so much more conscious of the choices I'm making about who I'm letting into my life and how much emotional labor I'm doing. And yeah, like, I don't have, I just don't have the energy anymore to kind of waste myself on things that don't fill me up. And that is a really, it simplifies things in a really profound way. Yeah.
Well, and there's gender socialization with that, right? Like I think when I look back at my, how my mother was raised and how she raised me, and I look at the other women in my family and even the people I was around, I think there was this sense that you just have to spend time with people that aren't really your people, and your job is to sort of be
You have to be nice and you
nice and
gotta have
tolerant,
everyone
or
like you.
yeah, and that like spending
Yeah.
energy in like a martyring type fashion was part of what you did to maintain friendships. And that is a price that I no longer let myself pay. But I think I grew up thinking that that was part of it.
Totally. I feel like the pandemic has done so much to contract our circles, but also to build that foundation. I mean, obviously, family, full-time exposure to my kids 24/7 was a very, very eye-opening situation where where I had to learn how to build my own boundaries, but also we were able to share a lot of things that we wouldn't have shared otherwise. And I had to think about the types of things I wanted to expose them to and like learn how to talk to them. For instance, like we just started watching The Simpsons, and like mind-boggling, but The Simpsons has been around for 32 years. And some of the ideas in the first seasons are 32 years out of date. Like just the way that there's a running joke about outing celebrities, and like those are moments where I feel like more, I mean, definitely obviously since 2017, I'm a lot even more woke than I think I already was, like, because we're constantly learning. We better be learning, because if we're not learning from all of these repeated mistakes, then, and the way that things have escalated and the way that people have been failing to communicate, then there's not much hope out there. But I do think there is hope because I've been having to really, in choosing who to hang out with, I also have to learn how to, I've also had to choose my words really carefully when I talk to people outside of that circle, because I definitely feel like I don't trust people as much. I think that when the election happened, it was there a giant call was taken over my eyes, and I looked around and I'm like, this is America. And I looked around my office and like realized that I had assumed that my nurses and staff, that we were all the same team, but then I realized that we weren't, and that was chilling in some ways, but also an opportunity for me to really start understanding who they were and where they were coming from. So like there were days when I cried in the office after the election, but there are also days when I like really sat down and really listened to some of my MAGA hat wearing patients, and like even hugged some of them when I realized, well, before COVID, what why they were feeling the way they did. And it was something that informed me as a human being, I think, and hopefully it's made me a better writer, but it's also made me much more intentional about what I write, like the meta stories, like that we can talk about later. And I know that there's another question on how it affected writing.
What about you, Amber? How have things changed for you in
Oh my
general?
gosh. I feel like every area of my life has changed so much in the last 4 years. But I resonate with what you all have been saying about, feeling this real shift in how I want to expend my energy, in personal relationships, and then even in the writing world. I remember probably 4 years ago, um, I would have basically said yes to any interview, any invitation, just because I felt like, oh, I'm obligated to say yes. And now I don't feel that way at all. I feel like I can really have more control over what I say yes and no to, that I just didn't feel empowered to do before. But I also, I was listening to everybody talking, and I realized, I think I'm actually a lot happier these days, than I was, which, um, maybe it sounds funny even to my own ears, because we've been through a really, trying period of time as a country, as women. But I think I have really learned to not be as focused, or not really focused at all, on that element of external validation, which I feel like was like ingrained into me growing up. That really all of my value lied lies in, someone else telling me that I have value. And it's been one of the major shifts in my life to date, is really recognizing that, no, I'm empowered to give myself value. And it that's been a huge life lesson for me. But yeah, I don't think my views necessarily have changed, but they have very much deepened and expanded as we've gone through all of this turmoil. And, I've definitely learned a lot about myself. I've learned a lot about other people's experiences, because I think everyone is sort of claiming space for their voice, and it's so important for us to be listening to each other. So I think that is one of the big things that has really impacted me over these last 4 years.
Something you said, Amber, about like trying to let go of that need for external validation. That is something that like has been so on my mind for a while. And it's a major theme of Tell Me My Name, my book that just came out. And, you know, as writers, we just live in that world, whether we want to or not. Like, we can write for ourselves as much as we want to, but as soon as we like put it out there, as soon as we like try to get it published, as soon as people start reading it and reviewing it and buying it or not buying it, like, it's so hard to just stay in that place of just being grounded and knowing our worth and not letting kind of that outside world, I don't know, suck it out of us. So I am very, I'm really excited that like you're able to kind of like have some peace around that, because I'm definitely still working on it.
It's a work in progress for me too.
Yeah. And I think it always will be. Like, it's just like, it's not one of those things you just accomplish. Like, I feel good about myself all the time, and I'm never going to doubt myself ever again. Like, that is not ever going to happen. But like, yeah, speaking of writing and like being professional writers with our stuff in the world, like I'm really curious how your writing has all changed over these last 4 years, and why do you think it's changed in the ways it has, and how are like, what's your kind of evolution as a creative person been like over the last few years?
Definitely think that, you know, from my first book to my second book, I wanted to be louder and more intentional in whose stories I chose to be token. So I often talk about how my first novel was written before We Need Diverse Books, and it was written from the point of view of an author, me, whose initial full-length novel that I wrote, it was a thinly veiled autobiography of an Asian American girl growing up in central New York, right? And so it was, you know, good enough to get me an agent. And we went on submission, and we had multiple houses respond with the concern that it was too similar to another Asian American book on our list. And that was a long, you know, that was like 2010, 2011. No, it was 2009. It was like way before We Need Diverse Books. And that was the prevailing notion, that there was sort of an unspoken quota for a lot of books. And certainly one of the experiences that made me want to help found We Need Diverse Books. But so when I wrote None of the Above, I whitewashed that book like nothing else. I said it in my high school, except without me, like without an Asian American girl in it. Mostly white people, because there was the idea that, oh, if I have an intersex main character, I couldn't possibly make them a person of color because it'd be too much diversity, right? And so I whitewashed myself on my book, and it was only my editor who I was like, you know, because when it came out, like when we were copy editing it or proofread or going through first round edits, was when We Need Diverse Books start, and so I actually was able to fix some of that. But so when I wrote This Is My Brain in Love, the story was initially meant to sort of loosely parallel my relationship with my Italian husband. And so there's an Asian American girl and an Italian boy, but I'm like, why does that boy need to be Italian? Like, I'm like, actually, I want him to be Black. And it was a hard thing to do because it wasn't my own voice. And it was something that I had to really make sure was the right thing to do, and I did it responsibly, that I talked to a lot of people, that I had a lot of humility when I wrote it. But I mean, it's a book that I wrote differently because of where we were as a society. And it was really, really important for me to show lots of different types of neurodiversity, and to show that there's no new normal, there's no real thing as normal, and that everyone's a little bit crazy, to reclaim that word. So it's changed it's changed my attention to the type of stories I want to tell. And obviously with the Own Voices movement, it's changed the stories that I feel comfortable telling as well.
I mean, I think I've got sort of a similar answer. I think like you, like you, Eileen, I think I'm just louder. I think I've also, like with Legendborn, there were parts, particularly later on in the process, like when you're probably not supposed to be doing as much, as much new content. But like closer to line edits and copy edits where I was like, you know what, this paragraph needs to change, or this moment actually isn't reading the way I want it to read. And I found myself, this is a very long time after the very first draft, but like you, I was in the process of really pushing it out into the world in those final steps. And I remember thinking, okay, no, that's not it. It's got, let me just sort of let it come from a very raw place and see, and then deal with what that looks like the next time I look at it. Like, I'm just going to let this out. And I think I got very, I gave myself a lot of permission to do that. And I didn't really think of it as brave or fearless or something, but I do remember hearing from my editor, like, wow, like you're really like, this is fearless work. Like, you're just saying stuff that often doesn't get said or gets massaged in a certain sort of way when it gets put into books or whatever. And I remember thinking like, well, I hear that and I think you're right, but I also think there's a part of me that feels like, why, like, we can't keep doing that, like I think I probably got to a lack of tolerance in my own work of just like, actually, no, I can't do that anymore. Like, I felt like I had license and permission and support to do that. And some of it was, for me personally, the protests around George Floyd's murder last year, just a sense of urgency and a sense of, whose interest am I protecting by not being raw and open? Like, what are the entities that are going to benefit from me, making this look pretty, for lack of a better phrase, making this instance of racism or these very real experiences that I have had that in my mind live very clearly. So why am I trying to sort of like muddy them for someone else's experience? So I think that has definitely shifted, particularly in the last year, but in the last few years too, in terms of, I have that question in the back of my mind, like, who would benefit if I wrote it this way versus who would benefit if I wrote it this other way? And there have definitely been some times when I'm like, you know what, this feels scary, but I cannot help this mentality. I can't give a certain type of, and it's not because I'm thinking about a certain reader necessarily and writing for them or whatever, but it's sort of being aware that art and writing is often used as a weapon by people who would not support me. So what is my role in like making my book as like impossible for them to use as I can?
I love that the question you posed is like, oh, kind of a tool for writers to make decisions. Like, who is going to benefit if I do it this way, and who is going to benefit if I do it this way? I've never thought about like a writing choice in exactly those terms, and I'm really excited to like start thinking about that and like just, yeah, having that as a tool when I'm having a hard time deciding like what I want to do. So thank you for that. I hope other people can benefit as well. Um, and I loved what you both have said so far about just kind of like being fearless in the last few years and just feeling like an urgency to just, yeah, just do it and to be raw. And for me, that's kind of manifested in a couple of different ways. I've had 2 books come out in since then, and they're very different, but I think they both are fearless in that I just admitted how weird I wanted to be. I think I'd always wanted to just play with form a lot more, but just felt really like locked into this box of I'm a contemporary YA author and I write realist fiction and blah blah blah. And I think with my book, The Boy and Girl Who Broke the World, I was just like, I'm just gonna be really weird, and I'm gonna write about a couple of characters who I care a lot about, who are wounded the way I love my characters to be wounded. But I'm gonna throw some magic in there, and I'm gonna like put some like, unicorns in there, and I'm gonna like add some surrealism. And I think too, like, that being the book I wrote after Our Stories, Our Voices, and after The Nowhere Girls, which were both incredibly intense experiences for me, and incredibly emotionally, I don't want to say draining because that implies like something being taken, they were so fulfilling and so important and like life-changing. But I was pretty exhausted after those two books. And I think that I needed almost, I don't want to say escapism, because that sounds like, I don't know. But I wanted to have fun. I wanted to create a world that I could go to that felt um like, I don't know, cozy. Like, I wanted to be with characters in a world where it felt a little more gentle than the world I lived in. And so that was kind of my intention with The Boy and Girl Who Broke the World. Um, and then with Tell Me My Name, I was just kind of full of rage. Like, that was my book where I just let myself be very, very angry. And it is about a girl who, I still don't know how to explain it. I should know by now. It's been out for a month, but so it's like part of the story. It's about this girl who was sort of raised in the Hollywood machine, and she is a child star who, like so many child stars we see, just her life just kind of spirals out of control. And it's, she has a lot of trauma in her life. Um, and so it's like that book is, it's an exploration of that. It's the exploitation of young women. It's an exploration of our crazy world. It's set 50 years in the future, in a world where, like, there's one corporation who kind of runs everything. Climate catastrophe is out of control, and basically the world is on fire. And so it was the book that I just was like, here is all my fear and all my rage, and I'm just gonna like make a book out of it. And but at the same time, right, like I want things to be beautiful, and I want to like combat that anger with like an equally powerful and fierce compassion. And so that book was really just like a practice of me, like just being so vulnerable with all of the things that I'm scared of, all of the trauma I'm scared of, and then countering it with like, here's how you heal, and here's how you face it. And it was an incredibly like profound experience writing that book, because it was so raw and so vulnerable, and at the same time really like craft wise a really new experience for me to write in kind of a more experimental way, to do a psychological thriller, to write something in the near future. So yeah, like it's interesting just like sitting here and reflecting on like how we've changed personally in the last few years, and like how that's kind of mirrored so much in our work too. Like it's so hard to separate those, right? Like I think artists, for the most part, like our work reflects what's going on inside and what's going on and how we're interacting with the world around us. And that's so much what Our Stories, Our Voices was about, like how we have navigated this world as women, and how that experience has translated into how we create, and how we like use that experience and that knowledge and that insight to make something that other people can interact with and learn from, and hopefully get something out of. And hopefully, our stories can help empower other folks to tell their own, or at the very least not feel so alone. Does anyone else have anything they want to add? Any other questions you want to talk about? Anything that you wish you could have said that you forgot to say?
I think it was really interesting for me to think about like what, because I sort of have thought of my writing as staying the same until I really started to think about it. Like, so I really connected with what Eileen was saying about how, you were querying your debut novel back in 2009, I think you said. And same for me, not quite as long ago, but like I think I finally got my agent in 2012. So that's like almost 10 years ago now. And I was in such a different place when I was writing my first book the way I used to be. And I did have to really make a lot of changes to that book to sell it. So I started submitting it in like 2010. It didn't come out until 2016. So I just kept getting like rejection after rejection after rejection. And along the similar lines of response, like, well, we already have one sexual assault book on our list, or like, as if there wasn't room for more than one story. And now, not all that many years later, there are so many stories, so many books that deal with such a huge range of sexual assault and abuse experiences that I think there just wasn't the platform for not that long ago. And I definitely felt that as I was writing that first book. Like, I remember at one point that my draft of that first book was like 30,000 words longer than it was in its final form. And I've been recently looking back at all the stuff I took out of that book, and I was thinking, I had to do that to get it published. Like I couldn't have made my main character a lesbian, I don't think, in that book at that time, because you know, there just wasn't that space. And now there is. And I've definitely, seeing myself push my own boundaries a lot more when I'm writing. And even most recently, my book that's coming out next year is in a different genre altogether. And I think, Amy, like you said, about wanting kind of a softer world in The Boy and Girl Who Broke the World, a softer world, or a more gentle world than what we were actually experiencing. And so my middle grade book is definitely lighter and more, like more warm-hearted. And I think I really needed to be writing that during this pandemic, because I needed like that space to like be comforted and escape in a way. But definitely I've felt my personal life informing what I've been writing.
Thank you, Amber. Well, thank you, all of you, for being here and sharing your stories and your wisdom. I'm just so grateful to know you and to be able to work in this world with you. And I think that's probably it. Were we supposed to talk about anything else? Does anyone remember?
I don't think so. I think
Okay. Well, there are other panels and things as part of this that you can check out, and we will talk about some other cool stuff on those as well. So thank you, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you again for joining us for 21 Conversations. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like and share with your friends and fellow readers. One final reminder that Greensboro Bound is a nonprofit organization committed to bringing together readers and writers throughout the year at zero cost to our community. Please help Greensboro Bound maintain that commitment with a sustaining or one-time gift now. The number to text to give and our website are on your screen. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you in person next year.